Okay, so welcome to the first of the two sessions for this week, which is week 3 of DGL. Tonight's session is mostly going to focus on digital citizenship because this is the focus for this week. Um, Again, we kind of have a pattern here where the first session is more global in nature. We'll focus on the sort of bigger issues that we're working on, and then Thursday's issue will focus more specifically on the assignment you need to complete. Just to give you a heads up, Thursday assignment is in some ways similar to what you did for Sunday night. It has different parameters. It has a slightly different focus, but if you were excuse me, able to successfully complete the assignment that was due this Sunday, you'll be asked to use a lot of the same tools that you used for this upcoming assignment. But I'll get more into that on Thursday. Um, so this week we're going to focus mostly on digital citizenship because this is sort of the focus for this week. Essentially asking the question, what kind of person are you online? Um, so I do want to take us through that a little bit. So we'll go over the nine elements of digital citizenship, which is actually a reading you have to do for this week. Then we'll get into some of the specific activities you need to complete. And then, as usual, we'll open things up to Q&A at the very end. By the way, real quickly, just to mention the assignment that was due Sunday, I'm still responding to lots of people. I guess there was some chaos, not from my side or from the assignment, but just from I know there was some intermittent internet issues that were sometimes full sail oriented. So people who had trouble accessing LexisNexis, some people had trouble accessing the databases to get AP images and so on. I think I've responded to just about everyone. So people who had a good reason for something that tripped them up, I gave them extensions without penalty to hand in their work. But for people who watch this later, the same rules apply. If you didn't hand in the assignment Sunday night, it's pretty much we still allow people to hand in work, but there's a deduction for every day that it's late. So if you hand it in 1 day late, it's a 10-point deduction. 2 days late, a 20-point reduction. 3 days late, a 30-point reduction. And after 72 hours, people receive a zero. But I think I've spoken to most of the people who had legitimate concerns. Like, it wasn't just that they blew off the assignment or waited till the last second. Like, they had some sort of internet issues or something like that. I think I've reached out to most of the people who were kind of in that situation. Um, if I didn't respond to you and you're in this session, I'll ask you to please hold off your comments until the end of the session because then I can speak to people one on one. But I do think I spoke to most people who had, legitimate issues that required attention. Okay, so let's get moving. So there's this reading you have to do. It comes from online. As a matter of fact, if you go to Google and just start typing in like digital citizenship, you'll get as your very first search result this reading called "The Nine Elements of Digital Citizenship." Some people actually even referenced it when they did their Digo project from week one. Um, it's a pretty famous reading. That's why we assign it. I'm not going to go through every single element in depth because after all, what's the point? You have the reading to do. You can do that on your own. But I'll quickly kind of rifle through them and get your feedback. Um, and so, even though there seems to be this wall of text that you're seeing here, I don't expect you to literally read this. It's a lot of information to put on a single slide. And it's just taken from your reading. So, again, because the reading is an assignment, you can do that on your own. But I'm going to sort of go through the basic 9 elements very quickly. And I'll also ask you questions about your feedback. The first one, and by the way, we're talking about digital citizenship, okay? Which is something we haven't talked about yet, which is really what does it mean when we have so much access to technology where we can just, with our smartphones or our laptops or our tablets, we can get online and participate in any number of activities. So obvious things include social media, so Facebook, Twitter, and so on. But it also includes, message boards, various discussion forums, even old school things like email. What is your responsibility as a person communicating in these forums? I think that a lot of people intuitively know kind of what's expected of them, but I'm always surprised when people don't. When people either because they've grown up with this technology and they just assume, oh, it's just like anything else. I'm speaking to so and so. That I think there's a larger commitment or a larger awareness that people need to think about. That just as citizens, regular citizens who walk out our doors in the morning and get in our cars and drive to work, that we have basic rights and kind of rules of conduct, even if they're not necessarily written rules of conduct. We sort of do certain things and don't do other things, right? We don't just accost people on the street. We don't just randomly insult people on the street. I mean, you could, but you could you could either be arrested or just come across looking like a complete. I'm trying to think of a PC word to use here, but a complete bad person because I'm trying to think of all the non ugly ways to say that. Josh is making a joke. That's his favorite pastime. Yeah, that gets into a whole another issue like digital citizenship. Okay, so like trolling, is that an acceptable activity? We see it all over the place. When is it okay? When is it not? By the way, I'm not against trolling. I mean, I don't think I'm an ugly troll. I won't go online and write the kind of horrible things that some people say, but I'm a big fan of sports. So if my Cubs win, I'm not against going on a message board and bragging about it, even though that's kind of silly because the Cubs are like the worst team in baseball. But that's part of trolling, right? That even if your team is the worst team around, it doesn't prevent you from acting like they're the best team. Um, Yeah, but Josh is, I mean, he's joking, but he says trolling Robin Williams Memorial. That's a good example. Like, call me PC, call me whatever, but like, that's to me, like, I won't do that. I'll troll about my favorite sports team. I'll troll about, I mean, troll is actually the wrong word. I'll sort of tease people or whatever in online discussion forums, but it's kind of in a nice way. Like, nobody's really fundamentally insulted or looking to put my head on a stake. But like things like Robin Williams passing, like I have no interest in going online and joking about that. Not because I fear being arrested, just because I don't know. Just as in the real world, I wouldn't do that. Online, I wouldn't do that either. And that's the issues I want to get into today. Is that sometimes people feel sort of protected because online often means anonymity, so you don't have to post things in your own name. So yeah, digital citizenship means not just about this specific instance of online trolling, but just in general, like how do we conduct ourselves online? Because I actually think there are a lot of parallels to the real world. It's just that sometimes people can lose focus of that. So the first issue that's up for digital citizenship is this idea of digital access. Okay, which in its simplest form is really like who has the right to be able to access material and who doesn't. And actually, I shouldn't put things in that way because everybody has the right. But why do some people not have access to technology? And I'll actually throw that out there as a question. You can answer in the chat box or you can raise your hand. Like, what prevents some people from having full digital access the way that others would? I mean, I can get online with my MacBook, my tablet, my smartphone. Uh, but why are some people still perhaps not open to full digital access? I mean, are there things that play a role? You can rely on your own experience or just use some guesswork. What could prevent some people from not having full digital access? Expense, Josh says. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think that's a key one, right? I mean, these things are expensive. I think I shared with you all that I recently joined the smartphone generation, becoming the last person in North America to finally get a smartphone. And even though I could technically afford a smartphone, I resisted for the longest time. Not because I couldn't afford it, but just because I hate to waste money. I don't like flushing money down the toilet. And it seemed like paying 80, 90, $100 a month for a smartphone. Like, why would I do that? But for other people, it's very much a concern, right? You may literally not have that money to spend to get that sort of access, which can prevent you from having full access to things online. Um, People forget that not everybody, like I could say no to the smartphone costs, but still access the internet in other ways. But there's some people who, and sadly, it's still a, it may not be the majority of people, but it's still a healthy segment of society that just can't afford, right? When it comes time to make decisions like should we have internet access in the home, there are people who will say no because we can forego that, or no, we don't need a smartphone, or we don't need a tablet. So yeah, expense could be a huge factor. Anything else we should add to that? We explored social issue. Okay, location. What do you mean by location? Josh said location, by the way. Do we mean location within the United States, depending whether you have good internet coverage or not? Do we mean depending on what country you're from? Some countries have better access than others. Okay, so there's coverage issues. Some people have great coverage, other people don't. I think in 2014, just about every segment of North America has a way to connect to the internet. Maybe they have lousy cell phone coverage, but I think it's pretty difficult to find even the remotest, smallest town in America that doesn't have a way to connect to the internet. Josh mentions government restrictions. Yeah, that could be actually a more powerful reason, and in certain countries outside the U.S. We have to remember that there are countries out there that don't have the access that we enjoy. Um, right? Countries that really clamp down on internet access. I'll throw out just another one in terms of digital access. I mean, I'm focusing much on the sort of bigger picture of who can access, who can. But let's keep in mind too, like all the people who we tend to forget about in terms of like, you know, someone who, for example, is blind or has severe vision problems. I mean, how do we make a material accessible to them? Right? I mean, people who are deaf and perhaps need an alternative format. At Full Sail, it's pretty sweet because Full Sail is actually pretty committed to this in the sense that if you're a student who falls into one of these categories, you're identified early on, and we as instructors have to come up with methods to be able to reach those people. And that's great because we sometimes can forget about that. But if we can deliver the same material in an alternative way, still using technology, but making sure that that technology is accessible to that specific student, that's an issue of digital access as well. Next one, the my favorite perhaps, digital commerce, which at its simplest, again, there's this huge amount of text on the slide that you can read on your own as part of the reading assignment. But basically, it boils down to the buying and selling of goods online. Is there anybody in this room right now who has not purchased something online or sold something online? And which do you prefer? Are you serious, Joshua, when you say that? Do you have never purchased anything online? Wow, that's extraordinary. I'm curious to find out why that would be so. How about other people in the room? I'm hearing a lot from Josh, but not so much from others. Chanda, Garrett, O'Shane are in the room as well. I mean, I'm not a big uh, commerce person. I'm not obsessed with the buying and selling of goods, but I have to admit that I like the idea of buying things online is incredibly incredibly terrific. Um, it's great to have things delivered to your door. It's great for convenience's sake, right? Just to be able to click and boom. Josh said limited funds, but I guess if you have to buy something, the price doesn't really make that much of a difference between online and from a brick and mortar store. Um, Chanda says she orders clothes and phone cases. That's funny because my phone case for my new uh, smartphone I bought online. And actually, here's a connection to Josh's statement. I actually ordered it online because I wanted to just grab a phone case immediately. I didn't want to wait, but actually the prices online were so much cheaper. Like I go to Target or whatever to find a basic case, and everything was $15 or higher. But through Amazon.com, I found one for like $7.98, and just call me cheap, call me whatever you want. But I was like, you know what? I'm not going to pay $15 for something that I'm not really that interested in. Um, I'll take the $8 case. So yeah, there's that. I'd say the only time I'm tempted, the biggest thing that I still use physical brick and mortar stores for is for when I want something so bad that like I just don't have the patience to wait for it to come in the mail, and that's pretty rare for me. But sometimes I just need to sort of have something, and I want to just go out and buy it and come home with it, and it's mine. But that's pretty rare. Um, and someone mentioned Amazon.com. Yeah, like I'm getting paid to promote. But yeah, I'm an Amazon Prime member, so you, you get 2 day delivery, free delivery to your door. It's like I can wait 2 days for most things. So it's actually getting to the point where if it's not foodstuffs like groceries or something that I literally need to survive, online commerce is the way to go. And I don't say that with pride because I think it's kind of sad. We've seen the collapse of a lot of stores because they've been affected by online commerce. Um, all these mega stores that were just so much a part of American history. Sears and J.C. Penney, and even like those mall stores like Radio Shack, like they've just been crushed by online sales. So I don't get pleasure in saying that online sales are dominating, but it's the sort of reality. I think most of the major purchases I've done in the past year or so have almost entirely been online. Next is digital communication, which means pretty much what it says that we have expanding communication options now in 2014, right? That people are in constant communication with one another, and I can't stress that enough. We talked a little bit about this in week one. We were talking about how old people are, and are they digital immigrants or digital natives or somewhere in between? And I describe myself as somewhere in between because I didn't grow up with this stuff, but I've learned to adapt. I've also seen the internet online experience grow from simple message board products like Prodigy and CompuServe to what we have today. But the truth is, yeah, we have constant communication, right? I mean, just constant. Information hits us so fast. We can reach people so quickly. And it's amazing, but we've already talked about the ways, for example, last week in which that can be sort of, it can come with a downside. I mean, constant communication is great. But if you're only existing sort of in the online world, it can create problems as well. Last week we talked about how to separate fact from fiction, right? When you get this constant overload of information and updates, it's difficult to tell what to trust and what to not and what not to. So those are things that you have to kind of be aware of when it comes to digital communication. I try to. I've actually been much better about this. I've consciously tried to take a break from things. So I take a break from Facebook. I take a break from visiting discussion boards. I take a break from all this stuff. Not because I'm against it. I think it's fine. I'll still check in once a day to see if there are likes or updates or comments. But I really try to limit things. But digital communication is just a reality. But that means that because we're constantly interacting, we also need to learn how to make appropriate decisions when dealing with digital communication. Um, I think again, intuitively, most people kind of know what to do because they take what they've learned in the quote unquote real world and apply it online, which I think is a good strategy. But it does present challenges. Digital literacy, I'm not going to go into too much because this is kind of the focus of this entire course. That we're dealing with new technologies, and they're infiltrating the workplace. They're infiltrating schools. I mean, at whatever level. Okay, I have two children. They're kind of on the young side, but their schools are aware of this. So there's computer access. I mean, my daughter actually texts her teacher. I could never text my. I didn't even speak to my teacher when I was in high school or grade school as a kid growing up. Now to think that people could actually text their teachers. She had a small project to do for her class where she had to introduce herself, and she and I got together and made a small iMovie. So yeah, schools, the workplace, you know this at Full Sail, right? It's full embrace of what it means to not just use technological tools, but how to use them appropriately, and also a more intense look at how they kind of work within the grander scheme of things. Because there was a period there where we were like in a mode of transition. People were switching from paper to paperless. People were switching from folders that were in file cabinets to just completely online, and like we've passed that transition. Like that transition is over. I know that there are a few places that haven't quite made the transition, but for the most part, like we are fully in the digital age. It's pretty rare to find a business, big or small, that is doing things sort of the old school way. And all that deals with digital literacy. Digital etiquette, this is what we kind of got into at the very beginning when we were just chatting. Like how are you supposed to act? Etiquette, by the way, is sort of a fancy term for what we would describe as manners. Um, Manners might seem artificial in some sense. They might seem like they're rules that you have to follow that might sometimes seem silly. But without any rules at all, we'd all just be sort of in chaos. So yeah, digital etiquette gets into issues of like what's proper conduct in line. I just said that sure, I'll joke on message boards. I'll kind of make some jibes about if my favorite sports team beat another sports team, I'll make some jokes or whatever. That seems like it's in good fun and good spirit, much in the same way that you might joke with coworkers or gently, politely, not in a mean way, like tease a good friend or a coworker or what have you. But at what point do you sort of cross the line? In what way do sort of manners get completely thrown out the windows? I mentioned trolling at the beginning just because that seems to be an issue, right? And by the way, if people want to chime in on any of these topics, like trolling, I mean, do you see really horrible people online, like people who are posting terrible things? And not terrible just because you're super sensitive, but like really like, wow, you might want to rethink what you said, or you might want to rethink would you ever have posted that if it were under your real name and not an anonymous moniker, which is a fancy word for screen name. Because these are pretty important things to think about too. Like, how do we carry ourselves online, and can it get back to you? Shane says he loves trolls. They're funny. They can be funny. I've seen some brilliant trolls online just because even if they're saying things audacious, there's actually a pretty clever person behind it. That's fine. What disturbs me more are just ugly people. Like people who just, like, you lose your faith in humanity. I know that seems like overly dramatic, but you like to think that in 2014 we've sort of turned a corner on certain things, and when you go online, you realize, oh my gosh, there are still people that think this way. And I think there's a difference between trolls who are just trying to get your goat. They're just trying to, and people who are legitimately like expressing horrible things without realizing it. Maybe they're not officially trolls, but I sort of put them in that category. China says people put too much online how they feel, and then there are people who just feel confident over the web. Yeah, I think that's the thing too, which we've gotten into, which is if you're posting anonymously, and by the way, I never post anonymously, which people told me is a stupid thing to do. But you know what? I don't care. I like the idea that anything that I post is attributable to me, so I'm accountable for it, which is great because it makes me more responsible. Yeah, I can joke, I can tease, but I know not when to go too far. But I really think that if people couldn't hide behind anonymity, they wouldn't post half the things that they say. And as O'Shane kind of mentioned, if they're just joking, I still think that some jokes are not really jokes; they're just sort of covers for what terrible things people really believe. But I think that's still distinctly different from people who use anonymity to just post really, really ugly things that they would never say out loud. And give them credit, I guess that's who they truly, truly are. But on the other hand, it's kind of sad that they have to hide when they post things online. So I always post under my real name. But yeah, Chanda makes a good point there, which is people can easily go online and just post what they want because they feel overly confident, or they feel like nothing will be traced back to them, or they feel like they're embracing a different personality, and maybe all that is okay, but I don't know. Yeah, well, Shane, that's why I don't play multiplayer. I'm not into it to begin with, but I'm, I guess, from what I've read, ugliness is sort of common if you go online to play Call of Duty, or you go on online to do something. Okay, the next one is digital law. Okay, so this gets into actual hardcore laws that are actually on the books, because there was a while there where the internet was kind of the wild west, and it still is to a large degree, and there are still battles over to what degree the internet should be controlled by governments, and I'm pretty much personally, I am pretty much open to the internet being as free as possible and not being too controlled by, governments or corporate interests. But at the same time, there is a basic need for some level of legality, and digital law covers this, right? So, for example, copyright, which we'll get into in week 4, is protected online. That was a big thing because when the internet became bigger and bigger and bigger, it became easier for people to just distribute things that weren't theirs. And I'm not just talking about the obvious things like music and films and television, but even things like specific images, um, specific thoughts that you posted. So we now have rules in place to cover that. And again, it's really just an extension of the things that we appreciate in the quote unquote real world. They're just extended to the digital world as well. And again, this continues to be sort of a work in progress. The next element, digital rights and responsibility, kind of touches on just a lot of the stuff we've mentioned in passing. That just as the Constitution has a basic Bill of Rights, there's a basic set of rights that extend to digital citizens, right? So we have the right to privacy, free speech, etc. So even though I may not like what people say online, even though they may say things that just insult me to the core, they do have the right to say them. I would never argue that we should clamp down on eliminating that. There's a little bit of wiggle room in the sense that individual websites can create their own terms of service agreements, so that when you click on right those things that we never read but just say accept. But if you look at the finer print, you'll often notice that you're agreeing to certain things. So certain comments boards, for example, will have rules in place that say, we have moderators, or we have systems in place where we can track comments, or or threads that specifically try to instigate hate, or that get off topic. Those aren't allowed. So there are small workarounds like that, but the basic principles that apply to the Constitution also apply online. Okay, so privacy, free speech, and so on. And this has been a controversy recently because this is, if you don't follow the news, um, there's been argument over the American government and whether it's been practicing its kind of overreach in terms of collecting data on individual citizens. The government's position has been, oh well, it's not that big of a deal because yeah, sure, we've been collecting this information, but we're not reading it, which I do believe. If you read up on the issue, there's so much data they collect, they couldn't possibly read through all of it. So when I text someone to say, "Hey, are we still meeting at Senior Frogs at 6 p.m.?" I don't really worry if someone's literally reading it. But I don't know. You should. maybe be concerned that an agency is collecting all that information. But this gets into issues of digital rights and responsibility. That we have basic rights, but we also can fight over whether we think there's been an overextension, an invasion, if you will, into certain rights. And currently, with the NSA issue, that's kind of in the news a lot. Digital health and wellness, we don't often talk about that much, but it really is important. Like, is there anybody here who works so much in front of computers that it actually affects them on some physical level? Carpal tunnel syndrome. Your eyes have trouble adjusting to the flickering screen. Um, Maybe posture issues. You're just sitting in front of a computer, cramped all the time, bent over. Josh says you got really fat. Does that count? Yes, I don't know if you're joking or not. Yeah, that counts, right? I mean, if you're living a sedentary lifestyle where you're not exercising and you're just always, Chanda says her eye's been twitching lately. Yeah, this is kind of old school, Chanda, but one of the jobs I had back in the '90s was it was a temp job for one summer where I had to look through reams of information. Not online. I don't know how you would. It's old school technology, but it was sort of like oh gosh, you guys wouldn't even know what this is probably, but it's sort of like a microfiche thing where it's like film, but you advance it by turning this knob, so you can scroll through it really quickly. Does this make sense? And like I would get nauseous just at the way the information would scroll so quickly past. Like I would have to get up and just walk away. It was kind of the equivalent of seasickness. So that might be an old school example, but people have like new world examples too, where um, you know sitting in front of a computer all the time, getting headaches, having issues with their fingers because they're typing so often. Often the game design students, the people or the mobile app students that here at Full Sail have these things because they're always working with a computer. O'Shane says two side effects: the eyes got bad with texting and some problems with the fingers. Yeah, I mean these things can happen, and we can joke about them and say, "Well, that's you know, sports players they get injured, or people go off to fight wars they get injured." But there still is a basic commitment to health issues. So even though Josh, I don't know if he's joking or not about weight issues, but yeah, maybe you should get up and make sure that you go for a walk. I love going for walks, by the way, to do something. Luckily, even though Full Sail's an online school, I don't spend all of my time in front of the computer. I try not to. I try to take breaks. I try to get away. I try to move around. I try to walk uh, for those very reasons. The next element is digital security, and this is kind of a no brainer. This just means do you take steps to make sure that your information is protected? You could go to extreme levels, like you're encrypting every message that you send, or you're using a virtual private network to hide your tracks online. But it could even just include basic things like, do you have antivirus protection? Do you have things installed on your computer that are looking for, the elimination of ads or such and such? Josh says no. Well, it's pretty important. By the way, I'm not trying to sell Mac, but that's one of the great things about Apple is that their computers, they're not completely immune to virus attacks, but they're pretty strong. Not only because they have a strong security system in place, but also because hackers tend to go for maximum casualties, which means because most of the computers in the world are still PC, they'll go after that. Or as we join the cell phone generation, they'll go after Android. Um, Mac is just much, much, much safer. So I like that. People are commenting here. I love and hate Mac. Is so locked down. Well, if you hang out, again, I don't remember how many people here are on campus, or I think most of you are online in your first month here. But eventually, you'll get your MacBook Pros if you make it to month 5 of Full Sail, and I think you'll learned to love it. I was a PC guy. I switched to Mac, well, mostly because it's the computer that Full Sail gives me to work on. But I honestly would never go back. There used to be a time where you'd work on, PCs were great for gaming because Macs are horrible. There are no games for Mac practically, but consoles have sort of replaced my need for a gaming system that's computer oriented. Okay, so those are basically the 9 elements of digital citizenship. There's a reading you have to do on that, and there's a discussion board open where you'll get to voice your opinion on any of those things. But now I want to kind of turn to the things that you do need to work on for this week. There's a big assignment that's due Sunday night, as usual, but I'll talk about that more on Thursday. But there are some smaller assignments you need to do for this week. One of them is this thing called the cold case activity, where you look at a specific historical event and examine it in terms of how it could have played out if they had the technology that we do today. So the cold case activity for you all deals with prohibition, right? Because there was a period in this country where alcohol was illegal. It was a very brief period because then they got rid of it because it was working so terribly. But there was actually a brief period in American history where the sale of alcohol, whether it was beer, whether it was hard liquor, what have you, was just completely illegal. So the cold case scenario asks you to kind of evaluate this historical situation in terms of what people could have done if they had today's technology. So I'm going to switch real quickly to the actual assignment sheet. Okay, so you can read this mostly on your own. It gives you an overview. In 1920, it was illegal to possess alcoholic drinks or to distribute it. For 13 years, law enforcement fought against it. Right, they had to enforce these rules. So there was sort of this, like anything, like the drug trade, there was a sort of, it still existed, but it happened behind the scenes. So those who wanted to drink or sell to those who did used various means, like speakeasies, which were dedicated clubs that sold alcohol. But then if the cops showed up, people would rush to sort of hide things and pretend that they weren't. And police and federal agents did their best to uncover these places and to grab their shipments. And it gets into details about how the criminal world benefited, right? I mean, we know these famous figures like Al Capone because they made a lot of money trafficking in alcohol when it was illegal. So the basic of this assignment is that, imagine yourself in this period where alcohol in whatever form is illegal. And whether you're for it or against it, how could tools or technologies that we have today played a role? How could they have had an impact or changed the situation back then? And I want to stress a couple things because it's pretty important because sometimes students forget about this. You basically have to do two things. More than two things, but two essential things. One is you need to come up with a scenario, okay? Scenario can be something very specific. So if you want to recreate a scene or imagine a scene, that's awesome. In my mind, scenario is a pretty broad term, but it means that you're somehow imagining the world of this time and offering suggestions. And that once you describe that scenario, you'll mention specific tools you think the people of that time could have used. I say this because I think the biggest issue that I see with the student submissions for this assignment is that they'll sort of say, "Oh, it would have been awesome back then. People could use Facebook, they could have tweeted, they could have emailed," but they sort of don't go beyond that. And so this assignment really requires, at its basis, two core things: that you have to sort of envision a scenario, you have to put yourself in that world and describe what could have taken place. And second, yes, to mention specific tools and mention specifically how they could have used. So this isn't an assignment where you just could have said, "Oh well, people sold liquor back then. They could have used Facebook to communicate with one another, or they could have sent each other instant messages." The assignment is actually asking you to do beyond that. And by the way, I encourage people to have fun because if we can get the discussion board moving on this, one of the more enjoyable parts is to respond to each other's scenarios and raise questions and sometimes laugh at the scenarios and suggest alternatives, things that people haven't thought of. So I'd say, have fun with it, go crazy with it, but also treat it seriously. I mean, really put yourself back in that time period, the 1920s, and what people could have done either to stop prohibition or to keep it in place using today's technology. Josh says, "Are we allowed to assume breathalyzers were in use?" Yeah, sure. I don't know. I mean, go for it. I mean, that's an example of today's technology. True, this assignment is more about digital technology, but yeah, I say go for it, especially if it in some ways enriches the scenario or enriches your discussion of the way that technology could have played a role. That's really what I'm encouraging here is for you to think through things and um, to think about the ways that either on the law enforcement side or on the opposite side, those people who were trying to escape law enforcement, what could they have done to sort of make things continue for their benefit if they had today's technology? Okay, and the same kind of thing applies. It's the discussion. It's pretty much open for most of the week. You should share your scenario with the discussion board by Wednesday at midnight, and then you'll have until Sunday to respond to at least two other students. Okay, so it's mostly a week long activity. But yeah, be aware of that you have to come up with a scenario, and you have to be pretty specific about the tools involved and how they could have been used. And as usual, let me see if I can bring it up real quickly. Always check out the rubrics so you see what you're being graded on. Because I always hate to do this when I have to take off points as the mean instructor. But for example, I have to grade things like were ideas shared about tools and technologies and how they could have impacted the scenario, right? So you have to mention tools and technologies, and there has to be a scenario. Or here's one very scenario specific. Were scenarios provided based on the digital tools mentioned? And then the typical stuff. Did you respond to at least two people? Did you mostly follow the rules of grammar and mechanics? But the big things are, yeah, that you have to present a scenario and you have to be pretty specific about the tools involved. Okay, there's another activity. This one is ungraded in the sense that you don't receive a full grade for it, but you still should do it because you'll lose some professionalism points if you don't. It's called location, location, location. It's a metadata activity. If we go into the assignment itself, yeah, Josh, I don't know if you're referring to this one or the prohibition one, but actually this activity is a lot of fun. I'm going to walk you through it in just a second. There's a TED Talk thing to watch. But there's also, am I in the right thing? Yeah, there's a TED Talk thing to watch, but there's also an activity in which I've given you a number of images down here. They're in a zipped folder. They're images of locations taken around the Full Sail campus, and you need to sleuth out where these locations are just based on the photos. And you can do this because if you watch the TED Talk, and if you watch what I'm going to walk you through right now, like it's amazing how much you can learn from people's photos. The TED Talk, I don't want to spill too much, but that's what it's about. It's about just how much information we can glean from things today in 2014. So, one of the things that this activity asks you to do is visit this site called, I always have trouble pronouncing it, but verexif.com. And what you can do here is you can upload any image, and it's amazing what the image tells you. So we're already at the site by the way. I'm going to choose to upload a picture. So I'll click OK. And let's see. I'm going to choose one of my personal photos. I think it's in this folder. At least I thought it was before I checked, before I went online. I think it's this one. Okay, so I've uploaded a photo, and if I just click on View EXIF, I'll get results. By the way, this is my daughter. She's 10. This is a cue for all of you to say "aw" or or she's so pretty, or she's the greatest looking child ever. Because if you don't, you will fail this course. Okay. Thank you, Chanda. A plus. Yes, I will. I am normally a completely above the board instructor. I do not bribe, but I do not, except when it comes to my children. If you do not post something positive, you fail the course. But okay, so here's a picture of her. But look what happens. Look at all the details we get about the photo. We know that it was taken using an Apple product. The product in case was the iPod Touch. Here's the date it was taken, September 2nd, 2013. So almost a year ago, right? Over Labor Day weekend. Resolution, etc. And all sorts of stuff. GPS, latitude, and longitude. And look what happens. We have a map down here. And if we click on the map, and I hope it comes up. Come on. Open up. There we go. And this is related to the TED Talk video that you'll watch. Like, you get pretty specific information on where this photo was taken. So I'm going to move this control panel out of the way. And if we keep zooming in, zoom, 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 zoom. Right? Actually, the TED Talk talks about this, how GPS is improving. It's actually a little bit off. It was taken in this house right here, not this house. But still, look at the precision. This is the house this photo was taken in. You can use Google Maps to zoom in on where this photo was actually taken on what day. This is in a suburb of Chicago, by the way. This is too much information, but my children live with their mother in another state, so we kind of met up in Chicago because that's where my parents are from. So my children got to spend time with their grandparents, spend time with me, and here's their home. Like, what am I doing? Here we are in a go-to session, and I'm giving you a Google map of, like, my parents' home in suburban Chicago, where this photo was actually taking place. All that can be gleaned just from a single photo. All of your photos, by the way, work like that. So I don't know your Facebook accounts. Nobody friends me ever. But like, if you have photos up there, all I need to do is take one of your photos that you've posted, plug it into that program, and boom, I'll know where it was taken, the location it was taken, and so on. Which, I don't know, is that frightening or is that cool? I'll just throw that out there. Is that really awesome or is that, like, disturbing? I don't know. Like, on the one hand, I think that, well, nobody really cares where my parents live in Chicago. Nobody's actually going to drive out there and bother them. But on the other hand, it's kind of weird. It's like, I don't really mind because I don't think anything's going to happen. But I guess if I had a choice, I would prefer that information isn't available. And probably there's a way for me to go into, my smartphone or my iPod Touch to change settings, but because most of us don't look into things that carefully, we're sending out photos all the time that just constantly report on our information. And I'm not one of those conspiracy theorists, okay? I'm not one of those people who runs around with a tinfoil hat worrying that the government is spying on everything that we do. But you can kind of see how it is easy for people to keep tabs on things if we're constantly sharing information that our own products that we purchase, share information about. Again, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, so for the most part, I think it's innocuous. Innocuous is just a fancy word for harmless. I don't really freak out about it. But when I found this website, it was like, oh my God, did I really share that much information with people? I guess I did. Now, if I go back to the site and pick another photo, let's see how this works. I think this one. Okay, so view EXIF. Josh says, can take stalking to a whole nother level. I can't remember. Josh, did you say you already watched that TED Talk one? I get confused because we have so many TED Talk videos. Is that the TED Talk video that actually includes an example of stalking, where someone is able to use GPS in a really kind of scary way to follow someone? It was used in the global session. Okay, we do have a TED talk online. I just can't remember which discussion it's associated with. But we have one that actually uses stalking as an example. But here's another photo. Okay, there's me looking sad and like a criminal. There's my two kids, by the way, daughter on the left, son on the right. This one doesn't have a GPS location. Why? Because again, it was taken with the iPod Touch, which, if you're familiar with the iPod Touch, it's kind of like the iPhone, but it just doesn't make phone calls. Right, as Josh says, with no Wi-Fi, and that's why we get no GPS location here, because this was taken in a diner, where unless the iPod Touch has a way to connect to the internet, it doesn't. So when I snapped this photo, or when someone else snapped it for me, I should say, it wasn't connected, right? So it needed to be connected to the internet to be able to capture and present that GPS information, which is why it isn't here. Again, I'm sure there's a way. Perhaps there's someone among us who's pretty savvy about these things. I'm sure we can go into all of our devices and turn off certain things or protect ourselves in certain ways. And again, I'm not a panic attack guy. I don't really believe that I'm being spied on. Nobody cares about me. Right now, I'm sitting in Orlando in my apartment talking to all of you. I don't really fear that the government is watching me. They could care less. And if they did pay attention to me, you know what? So be it. I'm like the least interesting person on the planet. Really, all they'd see from me is, oh, now he's playing a PlayStation 3 game. Oh, now he's hosting a go-to session with his students. Oh, now he's sleeping yet again for the second time this day. Or, oh, he's eating food now. Like, I don't really care about people watching over me, and I don't think that they are. But still, it is kind of weird that the very products that we buy report on things that we're not aware of. So the location activity, which I'll go back to right here, asks you to use the website that I just showed to take these photos that are available for you to download as an asset and figure out where they are on the Full Sail campus just from using this website, okay? And I know not all of you are familiar with the Orlando campus, but that's fine. The activity works nonetheless. But I think it's really fun and amazing. I mean, it's a little bit creepy, but it's also, I think, tremendously interesting. I'm always fascinated when students have no awareness of this. So it's great when I can pass on this knowledge to people. Uh, Josh says something about I can tell you where at least one of them is right now. I don't know what you're talking about. One of the photos, maybe, from the activity. Oh, okay, good. Yeah, I mean, go into it. Find those photos. Tell me where they are on campus. That's the purpose here. So, okay, you have. And by the way, this is a busy week for discussions. You're expected to participate in the 9 elements of digital citizenship discussion, the digital citizenship in action discussion, the DGL cold case, which is an actual graded activity on top of you needing to participate, and the location. So this is kind of an intense week for discussions. Again, as usual, I think I've said this in the past, I don't expect people to spend all their lives posting on discussion boards, but at the same time, I don't want people to just write one sentence either. Find that middle ground, find that balance where you think you've made a thoughtful contribution, even if it's just 4 or 5 sentences or a short paragraph. Okay, but make sure that you're posting, because at the end of the month, then I have to tally up things like who participated in this discussion versus that one. And even if it's ungraded, you still lose some points for not participating. So be aware of that. I think, let's see, let me go back to the PowerPoint. I think that's the end of the stuff I wanted to cover. Yep. Questions about anything. What you need to do for this week. Again, we'll hold off Sunday's assignment for Thursday. On Thursday, I'll go over, as I do every week, somewhat in detail, walking through students what they need to do. So don't panic. And I feel bad that sometimes it doesn't feel. By the way, now that I just said that, do I have it scheduled for Wednesday or Thursday this week? If anybody knows, the 21st. What day is that? What day is today? The 18th? 18, 19, 20. Okay, so it's Thursday. So yeah, Thursday. I mean, I feel bad because it feels like it's a little bit late in the week always, but at the same time, I think it's enough time because it's due Sunday that people should have enough time to digest what I go over and work on it and get things handed in by Sunday night. Uh, but yeah. And by the way, just to give you a quick glimpse at what's left, um, the assignment for this Sunday, it's kind of the last super intensive digital tool oriented assignment. I don't want to get too far in advance, but the very, very final assignment you'll do for this course is actually sort of old school, where you'll mostly be answering questions and, using like Microsoft Word to do so. So this is kind of like in some ways, the final hurdle in terms of, having to show me that you know how to use images, to know how to use the various tools. The final project for this course is actually sort of a step back from that. Josh asked if he could friend me on Facebook. Uh, yeah, that's fine. I need more friends. By the way, how many friends do people have? Go ahead and brag. 700, 600, 400, 249. Nobody ever sends me a Facebook request because, I mean, really, who wants to be my friend? it's like you want people that are kind of cool looking on your friends list, even if your friends list is 700. Nobody wants their instructor on their friends list. Uh, have the other people fallen asleep? It seems like Josh is the only one who's zeroed in on this session. Uh, by the way, I think I have, I don't know, 51 friends or something. I have a pathetic number of friends. So yeah, I'll I, I'll grab you as a friend just because I'm selfish and just want to. You're nothing more than a number to me. I'll just add you because I want to get that friends list up there. I'm pretty bad because I only accept friends who I actually know. Because people have 700 friends, 1,000 friends, and it's like, really, you know all these people, and of course they don't. But I'm actually, again, I'm old school. I prefer to actually friend people that I pretty much know. Although I guess students I technically know, even if I've never met them. Okay, so questions, concerns, comments, anything that we're going over this week. I think I've covered most of the stuff. There are basically a lot of discussions to keep up with. Um, that's my main concern. And the big one is that cold case discussion, where you have to kind of look at the issue of prohibition, which occurred in the 1920s, and sort of put yourself in that historical moment and really think through like how either side of the issue could have used digital tools and technologies uh, to sort of get by during that period. That's your graded assignment, but there are some other discussions as well. Anything else before I let you go? This one went a little bit longer. I guess I love talking tonight or something. Josh keeps sending me private messages. Yeah, if you need to find me, I should say this online. If you need to find me on Facebook, it's just my full complete name. I'm pretty easy to find. I'm the one with the giant Taylor Swift picture on my Facebook profile, so that's kind of a cue. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording of this session because people don't want to hear about this kind of random stuff.